When my husband died, Jason was only 10. I still remember how small his hands were when he gripped mine at the funeral. I promised him that day I'd never let him go without, and I didn't. I worked 2 jobs for years, one at the local grocery store, and later, the public library. We didn't have much, but Jason always had food, clothes, and every book he ever wanted. He was smart. So smart, I used to sit at the kitchen table and quiz him for hours before his exams. I never dated again. My world was him. Every dollar I saved went into his future. Every wish I made was for him, and when he got that scholarship to college, I cried in the kitchen for an hour, happy tears. He graduated, landed a tech job, married a beautiful woman named Emily. They bought a big house in the suburbs, and when they asked me to move in to help with their daughter Mia, I said yes, without a second thought. That's what mothers do. I cleaned their house, cooked their meals, picked up toys. I didn't ask for much, just a little space, and a little kindness, but love doesn't always get returned. I didn't know it then, but the life I'd spent building around my son was about to come crashing down. The library had been my second home for over 20 years. I knew every corner, every creaky floorboard, every child who came in for story time. I never made much, but I didn't need much. I had purpose. I had peace, until one Tuesday morning. That all changed. I'm so sorry, Linda. The city's cutting funding. The library board made the call. We're letting go of 3 positions, including yours. I didn't cry. I just nodded, smiled, and walked out. Funny thing is, I was more worried about telling my son than I was about losing my job. I thought maybe I'd wait a few days, maybe it would blow over, maybe I'd find something part-time, but secrets don't stay secrets for long. What is this, Mom? You lost your job, why didn't you tell us? I didn't want to worry you, Jason. I was going to find something else. You mean you've just been living here? Eating our food? Not contributing at all? We're already stretched thin, Linda. We have daycare, mortgage, bills. We can't afford another mouth. I wanted to remind them of the years I spent raising Jason. Of the nights I skipped dinner so he could eat, but I didn't. I just stood there, silent, as my own son looked at me like I was nothing but a burden. Maybe it's time you thought about moving out. It's not like you're working anymore. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed for hours. I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did my little boy become this? The house felt colder after that conversation. Jason stopped speaking to her unless necessary. Emily barely made eye contact. Even little Mia, sensing the tension, tiptoed around her grandmother, unsure of what had changed. 3 days later, Jason left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a printed lease listing a small apartment complex across town, along with a check for $500. Linda sat at the table staring at it, her hands trembling. It wasn't the amount of money, it was the message behind it. A subtle, final push. When she asked if she could stay just until the end of the month, Jason's voice was flat. Mom, this isn't personal. We just need our space. You've had a good run here. A good run. Like she'd been a temporary guest in the very life she'd built, Linda didn't argue. She didn't cry. That night, she quietly packed her clothes, her books, the framed photo of her and Jason from his college graduation. Everything else, she left behind. Mia ran into the room as Linda was zipping her suitcase. Grandma, are you going on a trip? Linda smiled, kneeling down and brushing the little girl's hair from her eyes. Something like that, sweetheart. Mia wrapped her tiny arms around her neck. Don't forget me. I never could. No one helped her carry her bags to the cab. Jason stayed upstairs. Emily pretended to be on a phone call. Only Mia stood at the window, watching her grandmother disappear down the driveway. As the cab pulled away, Linda stared out at the world passing by, her heart both broken and light. She had given her son everything, her youth, her time, her love, and now, he had given her back something too, freedom. The apartment Jason had chosen for her was modest. 1 bedroom, plain walls, an old radiator that clicked at night. But Linda never moved in. Instead, the cab turned a different way after leaving her son's house. It pulled into a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of town, lined with elegant trees and flowered gates. At the end sat a small but stunning brick home with ivy climbing its walls and stained glass windows that glowed in the late afternoon sun. Linda stepped out of the cab and walked up the stone path with grace, unlocking the door with a key she'd carried in her purse for years. Inside, the air was warm and clean. Hardwood floors. Custom shelves lined with first editions. Framed watercolors from her travels. A grand piano, though she didn't play. This was her real home, purchased in full 12 years earlier under a different name, through her lawyer and lifelong friend, Walter Reynolds. She made herself a cup of tea and sat down at the polished kitchen table. From a drawer beneath the cabinet, she pulled out a thick leather binder. Inside, copies of land deeds, account statements, stock portfolios, and a will. Linda Carter was not just comfortable, she was wealthy. After her husband's death, she had quietly invested the insurance payout with Walter's help. She bought land before it boomed. She purchased shares in companies she believed in. She lived frugally, never needing more than a book and a warm cup of coffee. Over time, those small investments had grown into something substantial. A fortune tucked away where no one could misuse it, least of all her ungrateful son. She had never told Jason. She didn't want him to expect anything. She had wanted to raise a good man, not a greedy one. But now, as she looked over the documents, she knew what needed to be done. That night, she rewrote her will. Jason's name was removed. Instead, the money would go to places that had truly mattered to her: scholarship funds for single mothers, public libraries in poor districts, food programs for children. Her legacy would not be a spoiled man's inheritance. It would be hope for those who had no one else. Linda closed the binder, took a deep breath, and looked out the window into the darkening sky. She had lost a son, yes, but she had gained something else: clarity, and the quiet power of knowing she no longer owed anyone anything. It started with rumors at the office. Jason's tech company had been on shaky ground for months, but no one expected the merger to happen so fast, or to be so brutal. Within a week, his department was dissolved. His position was no longer necessary. The severance check barely covered a month's worth of bills. He told Emily he'd bounce back quickly. He always had, but weeks turned into months. Interviews dried up. His savings thinned. Credit card debt crept higher with every passing day. Emily's patience wore down just as quickly. At first, she was supportive, encouraging, optimistic. But as the money dwindled, so did her kindness. "You were supposed to be the provider," she snapped one night, standing in their kitchen with her arms crossed. Not some unemployed man living off credit cards. Jason tried to remind her of everything they'd built together. Of how hard he'd worked. But she didn't want to hear it. The final blow came in the form of a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. "Divorce papers. I'm taking Mia with me," Emily said, cold and certain. "And don't think for a second the court will side with you. You have no job, no stability. You can't even take care of yourself." Jason barely spoke as she packed. He just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the same way his mother once had. The silence in the house afterward was deafening. The rooms that once bustled with noise were now still. The fridge was nearly empty. The mortgage payments had gone unpaid. Late notices piled up on the dining room table like a slow avalanche. One night, alone and desperate, Jason finally pulled out his phone and scrolled to his mother's contact. He stared at her name for a long time. Then he dialed voicemail again and again. Over the next few days, he tried to reach her. No answer. No call back. Not even a text. It was as if she'd disappeared. Out of options, Jason drove across town to the law office he remembered from years ago. Walter Reynolds, the man who used to handle his dad's affairs. He didn't expect much, but when he walked into the office and introduced himself, the receptionist raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, you're Linda Carter's son?" Jason blinked. "You know her?" "Of course," she said. "Mr. Reynolds handles all her assets." "Assets?" Jason asked, confused. A moment later, Walter stepped out from his office, surprised to see Jason after so long. But not unkind. They sat across from each other, the same way Walter had once sat with Jason's mother, decades earlier. I came here because I need help, Jason admitted, swallowing his pride. I haven't been able to reach my mom. I think she's avoiding me. Walter folded his hands calmly. She's not avoiding you, Jason. She just finally stopped letting you hurt her. Jason looked confused. Defensive. Walter didn't flinch. I suppose she never told you about the investments, the properties, the trust accounts. Jason shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? Walter slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, titles, account statements, lists of charitable donations. It took Jason several seconds to process it all. His mother wasn't poor, she was a millionaire, and she had left, on her own terms. As the truth sank in, Jason leaned back in his chair, stunned, speechless. Everything he thought he knew had just fallen apart. But unlike his job or his marriage, this loss cut deeper. He hadn't just lost a lifeline, he'd lost his mother. And he had no one to blame but himself. Months passed. Jason tried to reach Linda again, but the number was disconnected. No new address, no social media, not even a Christmas card. Winter turned to spring. The house was gone now, foreclosed. Jason lived in a small apartment and saw Mia on weekends. He was working temp jobs, picking up coding gigs online, trying to rebuild something from the ruins of his former life. Then one day, a thick cream envelope arrived in the mail, no return address. Just his name, written in his mother's elegant handwriting. Inside was a letter. Dear Jason, I thought about whether or not to write this many times, and in the end, I decided you deserved the truth, whether you wanted it or not. When you were born, I made a vow to give you everything I had, and I did, not just money or shelter, but love. Time. My entire life, I raised you alone. I gave up dreams. I swallowed loneliness, and I never once regretted it, but I made one mistake. I forgot to teach you something, that love is not something owed. It's something honored. When I lost my job, I didn't expect fanfare. But I did expect compassion. Instead, you looked at me like a burden, like I was disposable. That moment broke something in me. Not just as a mother, but as a person, so I walked away. What you never knew is that I've never needed your money, or your roof, or your pity. I've built a quiet fortune. Jason. I did it on the side, while you grew up. Slowly, smartly, and I never told you because I wanted you to become a good man, not a rich one. But now I see that maybe silence can become a kind of harm, too. I've left my estate to those who still carry love without conditions, to children who sleep in shelters, to libraries that give poor kids a place to dream, to mothers like I once was, alone, afraid, but unwilling to give up. You won't receive a dime from me, Jason. But I hope you receive something far more important, a second chance, to be better. To be the kind of man I once believed you were becoming, and maybe, one day, to be the kind of father your daughter will be proud of. This is not revenge, it's my final gift. Love always, Mom. Jason sat in silence for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. He read it again. Then a third time, tears streamed down his face, not from anger, but from shame. She was gone, but her words remained, carved into his heart like stone, and for the first time in years, Jason didn't feel entitled, or betrayed. He just felt small, and he whispered, to no one, I'm sorry, Mom. Jason sat at his tiny kitchen table, staring at the letter his mother had written. He had read it so many times the paper had started to soften at the creases. It haunted him, the quiet strength in her words, the painful kindness. She hadn't yelled, hadn't tried to guilt him. She had just let go, and that was what hurt the most. He had expected anger. But instead, she left him with dignity and truth. Over the next few days, Jason drifted through life in a fog. He barely noticed the pile of bills stacking on his counter, or the way his phone stopped buzzing with job alerts. He started seeing her in flashes, on the bus, across the street, in a woman at the park pushing a stroller. It was never really her. But for a split second, he wished he could run over, grab her hand, and say everything he should have said the night he told her to leave. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I forgot who you were. But there were no do-overs. He began spending his afternoons at the public library, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of longing. It was quiet there. Peaceful. Just like her. He watched the older women at the front desk helping children with homework, and for the first time, he understood how much of herself Linda had given to people who weren't even her own. She had lived humbly, and yet had so much, and he, who had once felt so entitled, was now left with nothing but his regret. One afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the library's donation wall. Plaques of names lined the panel, donors, sponsors, and legacy givers. At the bottom, etched in brass, in honor of Linda Carter, a lifetime of quiet giving. He stared at it for what felt like hours. In that moment, he didn't see a burden. He saw a woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, love him, and protect him, even from the truth of her wealth. She had never flaunted it. Never used it to control. She had simply trusted that love was enough, and he had failed her, not because he didn't know she had money, but because he had measured her worth by what she didn't have, rather than what she had already given. He stepped outside into the late afternoon sun and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to an old photo of her, smiling in the garden, hair swept back in a soft bun, dirt on her fingers, joy in her eyes. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, "I wish I'd been better." A couple passed him on the sidewalk, laughing with their daughter between them. He watched them for a moment, his heart heavy, but something inside him had shifted. It was too late to say the things he should have said, but it wasn't too late to live differently. And that, maybe, was what Linda had meant all along. The truth had hurt. But it had also freed him, because now, for the first time in his life, Jason wasn't chasing wealth. Or pride, or legacy, he was chasing redemption, one honest step at a time. Years later, Mia stood at the front of a small library branch, scissors in hand, cutting the ribbon to a new children's reading wing. Above the entrance hung a bronze plaque that read, "The Linda Carter Children's Library. For every child who dreams, and every mother who believes." Jason stood quietly in the back, hands in his pockets, eyes glassy. He had helped fund the final phase of the construction, not because he had money, but because he had learned how to serve. He had become a teacher, working at an after-school coding program for underserved kids. He gave what little he had, and it was enough. Every Sunday, he brought Mia here. They'd read together in the same chairs where story time was held. He told her all about the grandmother she barely remembered, the woman who once gave everything and asked for nothing, and though he would never hear her voice again, Jason spoke to her often, in the quiet corners of the library, in the bedtime stories he now read aloud, and in the man he was still trying, every day, to become, because even though she was gone, her love had not left him, it had simply taken the long way home. Years later, a soft breeze blew through the town as a small crowd gathered beneath an old oak tree outside a newly built children's center. A polished plaque had just been unveiled, the Linda Carter Foundation for Mothers and Children, in honor of compassion, quiet strength, and unconditional love. Jason stood off to the side, holding Mia's hand. She was older now, 12, bright-eyed, and full of questions. She had never really known her grandmother, but she knew the stories. Jason made sure of that. Every birthday, every bedtime, he told her about the woman who raised him. The woman he once forgot to cherish, but would never forget again. He had changed, not overnight. But little by little, through service, through humility, through remembering, he didn't just tell his daughter to be kind. He showed her, he volunteered. He listened more. He loved deeper, not to erase the past, but to honor it. After the ceremony, Mia walked up to the tree, tracing the carved letters of her grandmother's name. "Do you think she'd be proud of you now, Dad?" she asked. Jason knelt beside her, voice thick with emotion. "I hope so," he said. "But more than that. I hope I've become the kind of man she always believed I could be." Mia smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the field, the plaque. The tree. It was quiet, peaceful, just like Linda. And though she was gone, her love lingered, in stories, in stone, in the hearts of those who'd finally learned what truly mattered, because some mothers leave more than memories. They leave a legacy, one that never fades.